Hi, good afternoon, and first of all, thank you, Maria and Even, for organizing this and hosting us, and thanks for the invitation as well. So I run the European Telecoms Equity Research Team at Credit Suisse, which is an investment bank. And I guess as the finance guy, sort of segueing neatly onto the topic of private investment, I thought I'd make 4 points. The first point, which a lot of the participants have already touched on, but I think is clearly very important. 5G and the digitization of the economy is a huge financial opportunity. Whether we're talking about fixed wireless access or connecting everything, or as Stefan alluded to, the sort of transformation of industry, smart factories, this is a huge opportunity. And I think the one thing I'd add is I think it's happening faster than we perhaps would have expected. If you look, for example, just around the world at 5G smartphone adoption, it's around 4 times higher than 4G was at this point in the cycle. So these are things that are happening in real time. It's very hard to put a precise number on it, but I think there is a massive opportunity here. The second point, which I think is sort of the challenge for Europe, is around the returns. The European telecoms industry has very low returns. So if you look at the returns in aggregate for European telecoms, they've been below the cost of capital since 2010. If you look at what's called asset turn, which is basically converting a euro of assets into X cents of revenue, it's actually the lowest out of any industry in the stock market. I think this sort of investor perception of why the returns are so low is really about the fragmentation of the industry and the difficulty of getting scale, but also the regulatory sort of focus on price over investment. As a consumer, it's great that we get some of the lowest price points in the world, or certainly in the developed world, for broadband and for mobile. But from an industrial and a financial point of view, it's the part of the ecosystem that's sort of missing. The third point is, I think, the risk from low returns clearly is that Europe does end up lagging on deployment. I'd say more so on the mobile side than on the fixed line side. Just to give an example, there was an interesting report from OpenSignal last week. So they use crowdsourced data for measuring sort of genuine 5G availability. And what you could see was in the US, 5G availability is around sort of 20% plus of 5G or 5G users. Whereas in Europe, in the major markets, it's only 5 or 10%. So there is already a gap that has started. Clearly the issue is how do we close that gap? The fourth point is just in terms of the availability of capital. The money is there. This isn't a question of money. This is a question of returns. Financial markets are incredibly deep. They're very liquid. If you look at the huge fundraisings taking place by infrastructure funds, there's a ton of money available in theory for digital infrastructure. This is very much the case on the private side of the market, but you're seeing it on the public side as well, that there are parts of digital infrastructure where huge amounts of money are being raised. The largest listed independent tower company in Europe, for example, over the last 2 years has raised something like 15 billion euros in equity for an M&A pipeline of 2 to 3 times. So I think the positive is the money's there. I think the negative is just about getting it to the right places to drive investment. A lot of money that's being raised, for example, is about sharing infrastructure rather than necessarily building more. Now, I think sharing infrastructure is a very important part of getting there in terms of connectivity over the next few years. But it's a bit like when you're looking at Uber and ride sharing. You take rides that you probably wouldn't have because you've got a wider availability of ride sharing, but you will also go places where you wouldn't go if you have your own car. It's ultimately about improving the utilization of the assets that are there, but also building new things on top. So I think what I'll leave it with is just the point that returns do matter. Ultimately, in terms of mobilizing some of this sort of wall of private capital, it is about creating an ecosystem where there's a good return, both for the infrastructure owners and for the service providers that sit on top. I'll leave it there, but obviously looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.